With more than 100 years of experience, Mitas is one of Europe's leading motorcycle tyre brands. Whether you ride on the trails, enduro, on the road or on adventures, Mitas have the tyres for you. If they're good enough for the likes of Chris Birch and Paul Tarris, they're good enough for me and our Noel. For more information, go to mitas-moto.com. Go the distance with Mitas tyres.
Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. This episode was recorded before I went to Morocco, but just after our guest Dickie Fincher, who is an ex-editor of Bike magazine. It's what he used to do a long time ago, some time ago, I don't know. Sorry Dickie, I didn't mean to be rude. I was introduced to Dickie via our friend Steve at Mitas Tyres. Mitas, still don't know. Nobody does. It's not important. Dickie had just got back from his trip with Chris Scott exploring the Trans-Morocco trail, which if you don't know, make sure you listen to our TMT episode. Gives you a little bit more information about it. But basically it's a Trans-Euro trail for Morocco, which for us, certainly in the UK, is probably the easiest and greatest place to ride. So I've also just got back from 5 days riding in Morocco, and you've got to go. And if you would like to go, we will be hosting a trip organised and planned by Wilderness Wheels based in Ouarzazate next March sometime. Not sure of the date yet. We need to make sure we're missing Ramadan because we went there during Ramadan and it was quite difficult to find any food during the day. We'll try and avoid that next time. Anyway, this is a cracking episode with Dickie Fincher, and I think you'll enjoy this one. All right, let's get on with it.
My motorcycle credentials mainly come from having edited Bike magazine, but obviously before I got to that point, the first biking I did was in my teens on a Fantic Motor 50, which I bought at college and blew up on about day 3, going down a steep hill in Dartmouth, actually. So if anyone knows Devon, the hills are steep, and it was too steep for this poor little thing to withstand. So that was that. And then a couple of years later, I ended up in Cairo, rode around there, bumped into these German guys who were buying up old British bikes with the intention of taking them back to Germany, although actually what they were really doing was buying them up to ride around. They pointed me in the direction of somebody, and I ended up with an A65, which is a BSA, and they're all old police bikes, actually. A lot of the bikes people think are from World War II. They're not. They're a bit later than that. They're sort of 1950s and 60s police bikes. They were usable, so this was the early 90s. We covered some real distance on them. There were a group of teachers working for a school out there who would brew up extraordinary things in the lab, drop them, and then head off into the Sinai, absolutely off their box on whatever it is they just made. I was excited enough by motorcycling to not need to take whatever they were taking, but they had old Dniepas and things like that. And so we would ride around and had a fantastic time. I mean, an absolutely fantastic time. I didn't know very much about them and got lost and stuck and broke down and all that sort of stuff. But obviously there's a lot of knowledge about how to keep things working. Not mine, I hasten to add.
How did you find yourself in Egypt?
University. I've been in the Navy, and then I left the Navy, and then I went to university and did Arabic. And so you get sent out to an Arabic-speaking country. Ended up in Egypt, which was fantastic. Absolutely amazing place. Bit hectic, as you might imagine. I've sort of properly learned to ride in Cairo, which is quite a mad place. It was very fun and very hot, obviously, and I rode around in the sand, but not really knowing much about it. They disconnect the front brake when you go for your MOT there because they consider it to be dangerous. I mean, the idea of a dangerous front brake on an old British drum-baked bike is bizarre. It is dangerous, obviously, because they're useless. But when I was out there, I started reading bike magazines, read performance bikes. I don't know how on earth they got copies of performance bikes out to Cairo, but they did. As I was about to come back, they had a job for a road tester. And so I thought, well, that'd be great. Not really having read motorbike magazines for very long. certainly not really being a performance bike sort of person, having probably never been above about 45 miles an hour. Anyway, I wrote to it and I got the job. I think the chap who edited Performance Bikes at the time, Rupert Paul, who I'm still extremely friendly with and see on a very regular basis, I think he would describe it as after something a bit different. I'd written all sorts of lunacy to get into the job, and he was very much a lunatic, and so were their brother. And they'd also got a gang of brilliant riders, so I think they thought they'd take a chance on someone who might put a different twist on it. The twist I put on it was destroying an enormous number of motorcycles in a very short amount of time, which inevitably led to my quite rapid sacking from the job. It was sort of unsustainable. Rupert was terrified. Well, he was terrified for his budget, but I think primarily he was terrified for me because I was literally hopeless. The first corner of the very first road test, I lobbed an RC30 under a car, and the photographer was convinced I'd been killed, but I just sort of rolled the other side of it and then picked up the bike and phoned up Honda and said, "I'm ever so sorry." They sent me the new indicator and a clutch lever, and then I rode it up to Edinburgh and carried it up into someone's flat, and I watched the Edinburgh Festival. So it was all a bizarre existence, which lasted for about 3 months until it had to stop for everybody's safety, I think.
That's one of the questions I was going to ask, because I get people asking me for advice, and Steve's asked me to write reviews of the tyres, and I think whilst I've been riding since I was 12, effectively, I've probably not ridden enough bikes that I feel competent or comfortable to really review a bike. I just don't think I could do it. And you get a lot of influencers now that have been riding for, 6 months and they're sending out bike reviews. And it's just like, well, what are you basing that on? But it seems like you got away with it for a few months.
I think a few of us did. Most people have got a much more of a history in doing that. I think my quirky writing style kind of possibly saved me for a bit. So I ended up doing some interviews and things like that. Like I said, it couldn't go on. You have to have a sort of sponsor in this case, somebody who actually goes, yeah, all right, I'll take a bit of a chance on you. Same with anybody, really. When you take on a new job, someone's always interviewed you and they give you a break and as you learn the ropes and stuff. I was fortunate with that, but then I actually had to go and do some of the hard yards and actually learn to ride a motorbike properly. And I did some freelance stuff because I'd met, most of the editors and whatever at that point. And after a couple of years, I was contributing bits and pieces to quite a few magazines. I'd also fine-tuned knowledge of the grey market. If you remember, the grey market bikes that were coming in from Japan, a lot of the 400s and things, which suddenly was my little niche. I knew lots about them because obviously everybody else was concentrating on the main production runs of stuff that you get in the UK. I'd been given a couple of stories to chat to some grey importers, and so that was a thing that I did for a bit. And then I filled in a gap on MCN for a bit, and then very quickly became the MCN road tester, which seems entirely bonkers. But at that point, I had ridden quite a lot of bikes. Even before that, I was riding 2 or 3 different bikes a week, starting to do some track stuff. But honestly, the pace that I could ride at compared with the pace that some of the testers could do, it's still a different thing. But it's not always about that. That was a job I held on to and then progressed through my career on bikes, so that wasn't too bad. There was a kind of little sort of spark of wonderfulness, which very quickly was extinguished and then had to be properly lit, because as I realised, actually, I do quite enjoy this, and I think I would like to do it, but I am going to need to work at it a bit. So it was a normal job, and then in the background, getting some bikes to test and doing that. And then at that point, by the time you road tested for MCM for a few years, you have ridden a lot of bikes. It's at least 2 or 3 a week.
I haven't asked this question for a while, actually. What are your biker pronouns?
Well,
a lot of people go, what the fuck are you on about, Clive?
Yes, I am going to say that, yeah.
Are you kind of a track rider, road rider, tour, adventure rider, trials rider? How would you describe most of the riding you do now?
I think now I am a road, adventure and trail rider. Bear in mind, the first riding I ever did was the stuff in Egypt, so that was adventure riding. The moment you got on the bike, it was an adventure until the moment you got off it again. So I really enjoyed that, and I loved the fact that it was a incredibly useful way of hooting around in a city, which is not something I do very much at all these days. And I also set off around the desert, did some great stuff riding around the desert and did laps of the oases and properly disappeared. I really, really enjoyed that. So that was set the scene, I think, and that is the stuff that I still like doing very best of all. But I find that to get a little taste of that, it's a bit of trail riding locally or going over to Wales or wherever it may be when the season provides.
We're going to talk about your trip on the Trans-Morocco Trail with Chris Scott after we finish this bit, but have you done many other exotic adventure motorbike stuff other than Egypt?
So I did some fantastic trips on the magazines, obviously. The best adventure trip I did on the mags was one with the Greek magazine. So every now and again, we share information with some of the other mags. So the Yanks, I go out and do some work with them every now and again over in California. I was offered a job over there, which I didn't take. I'm not entirely sure why, but I still did a fair bit of riding over there for a few years. Mainly road. In fact, I think almost all road over there. Their dirt riding over there is something else. I did go and watch some of it. The godfathers of this were the guys riding out there at the time. It was wonderful to watch them prepping and doing some stuff. Those are the kind of bikes that I think we all quite like, the kind of desert sled type stuff. That's what they used. That's what they were prepping for races and things for the Baja. But the Greek trip was fantastic. This was probably my first proper off-road trip where they said, right, we're going to get some people in. They got in a Japanese journalist, some Germans and me and a few others, and they just put together a pool of bikes from a Husaberg, which we all thought was ace. A Husaberg 501, I think it was.
Until it broke, obviously.
No, it didn't. It was a magnificent device. Well, it only had to last for a week. And then the most roady thing I had was a Honda Dominator. But even so, that was great, again, because we were kind of riding a bit of road, lots of gravel tracks, the odd bit of technical stuff, but nothing that was off-putting. And we had a whole lap of Greece, week out riding around. That was ace, and that's somewhere I'd love to go back to. Absolutely fantastic. With a lot of the stuff you do with journalists, especially if they're on their home soil, it's done at something of a pace. And so you're slightly hanging onto their coattails. Fortunately, they're pretty good, actually, those guys. I've ridden with some French journalists over the years, and they were not quite as thoughtful. That was my fastest ever crash, was on a French motorway, hitting some water literally flat out on a 600. So I just sailed along on my arse in this giant puddle. Walked away from that one, which I'm very pleased to have done. So the foreign guys do sort of ride quite fast and hard, I find. They can be a bit alarming to go out with, but it's brilliant fun doing that. So the Greek thing was great. That got me into the dirt riding side of things. So I then came home and bought myself a dirt bike, DR350, which I immediately entered into Western Beach Race 3 weeks later. That was a massively, massively dumb idea. Turns out riding sand is much harder than you think, especially on a great big, stupid DR350, which must weigh 150 kilos. There was a bloke who overtook me on a Honda Ape three-wheeler 50cc wearing a monkey suit, holding a banana. So he lapped me several times. And then there were some people on sidecars who just literally rode over me. I'd kind of go into a corner, fall over, and all the good guys go, oh, great, there's some traction. And they just use you as traction. I did 4 laps. Absolutely pitiful. I came into the pits. I'd sort of got some people there with pits. And so I came in. I'd done 1 lap, bear in mind, at this time, but I'd obviously been out for weeks trying to get round. Being pulled up the hill by the bloke with the rope and the hook and all that stuff. So I did all that. Got into the pit, and the guy sort of throws the bike up, and I think gives it a bit of a wash, like my mate, and washed it down, opens the thing, and tries to put some petrol in the tank. But of course, the tank's still completely full. Because I haven't done anything. I've only gone about a mile, or whatever it is, mile down the one way and then mile back the other way. And it's only a 350, which has probably done no more than 2,000 revs. But. So that proved to me that I probably needed to get a bit more practice in before ever doing anything like that again. And I still haven't had enough practice, and I haven't done it again, and I don't think I ever will.
The thought of racing again at my age, you look a bit younger than me, but yeah, I just don't fancy it anymore. People keep encouraging me to do things. It's like, no, I'm too old, too fat, too unfit. I'll just talk about my previous racing glory.
Absolutely, we dwell entirely in the past.
So what's in the garage now other than the Ducati Desert X Rally, of which we spoke earlier?
The Rally is my main bike. That's the bike that I use for riding around on. I also have, which is why you're not going to stiff me for riding around on a big bike, I've got a CRF 450. Thank you very much. And a TW 125, but with a Desero engine in it. So there. So I actually do like small bikes, and I ride small bikes.
You can have a bike for every occasion.
Exactly.
The TW, is that the big fat wheel thing?
Yeah, it's a bit silly. I actually bought it off Chris because he was going to ride to Morocco on it. And then he realised that that was a massively bad idea. Mainly because it's carbed, actually, and he was just off to do the High Atlas Trail. This is the one where they're going up, basically. This is Chris Scott, so you could go on trips with Chris. I'd sort of been in touch with him years and years ago on bike. So we'd run a couple of his bits, I'm sure, when he did the Adventure Motorcycle Handbook. He was kind of like one of our go-to experts on the magazine. Years later, some friends of mine said, right, we want to do an adventure and we want to go somewhere. I said, right, we're going to go to Morocco. I'm going to go with this guy because he knows all about it. And it was fantastic. And then I subsequently went and did the Trans-Morocco Trail with him, and then we sort of kept in touch since, to the point where I ended up buying a bike off him, which is this TW, which he's fitted a Serro engine to. So hence me having that. Because that came at exactly the point where I thought, right, I need to get myself a little bike to knob around on locally while I'm building my CRF 450 into more of an adventure bike. So that is the other bike. And the final bike I've got in the garage is an old Norton, a 750 Roadster. That was my 40th birthday present to myself, which I didn't get running until I was about 48. So it was kind of, so it was nearly my fifth, it was nearly both birthday presents to myself.
That's quite a collection. I'm quite impressed with that. Especially the CRF 450. There's not many of them around, is there? I don't think they sold particularly well, which is a shame because everybody was hoping for this low service, high performance, lightweight bike, and it kind of nearly did all of those things, didn't it? But not quite.
Obviously, it's great. I ride with a group of mates called with our sort of local shit bike club, and generally people have got whatever they've got. And we went up to Scotland to ride on some trails, and I took my Honda up with a tow rope, because obviously I have a Honda and therefore I should have the tow rope and everybody else can be rescued by me. You can guess what happened. It shat its starter motor and sort of cracked the crankcases, which is a thing, although an incredibly rare thing on these. So I'm delighted to have experienced that incredibly rare occurrence. So I've only just had it fixed, and we've been trying to work out exactly what the thing is. So irritatingly, the whole massive smugness of owning what should be a great bike and working out service intervals that aren't actually as short as you think and doing all this stuff. And I ordered some stuff from America, some parts for it. So it's now exactly ready to go somewhere, but I'm just really nervous about taking it anywhere until I can be completely sure why it did that. I think I know what it is. I think it's to do with the ECU backfiring and assorted bits and pieces like that. I've spent weeks on the internet, looking at stuff. It works fine. It's such a nice bike to ride. The engine is a joy. You can put these ECUs on that just soften off the bottom end and give it a bit more fueling. The cost obviously was insane. I saw it come out, probably like you. I thought, God, this is going to be a brilliant bike. That's exactly what I want. And then I thought, oh my God, look at the price. It's ridiculous. And then COVID came along, and a couple of people were flogging off their COVID demonstrator. So I bought it with 3 miles on, with the American ECU and a pipe and a few other bits and pieces on, for about $3,000 less than it should have been.
So you got all the performance mods, the standard then?
Yeah, I did, but the pipe's too loud if you're going trail riding. It's been a tweakage ever since, like all good dirt bikes are, fiddle, faddle, mess around. Because I desperately wanted it to be like my old XR 400 that I had. Because I've had all the XRs over the years, the 250, 400 and 600. And the 400 was fantastic, but it's just if you dropped it, it was such a bugger to get it started again.
So obviously that 450 is the ideal bike to take to Morocco for a trip with Chris Scott. Which one did you decide to take?
So I obviously took...
Not that bloody stupid massive Ducati, surely.
Yes, it's got the word desert in it.
Oh, okay, that's all right then.
If you read anything about Chris's route, they make a massive deal about actually trying to keep clear of the desert because that's where all the accidents happen. Not sure if you've heard about that. Even though it's got desert in the name, I will still take my Desert X. So I rode down with a mate who actually had a R1250 GS. So he had an even bigger bike than me. Chris was on his CF 450, which was brilliant.
CF Moto MT 450, isn't it? That's the one, yeah.
That was absolutely terrific. Because it turns out, much to my enormous amazement, that even though I've got a rally-bred Ducati, we still end up at the same place at about the same time every day. But he uses half the fuel and has paid exactly 3.5 times less for his motorbike. I am aware of the kind of ironies in that. But my mate Henry, who rode down with me, his 1250 was absolutely fantastic as well. And I am going to put a plug in for the tyres, because he was on Mitas tyres too, we ended up getting a proper tear in his tyre, and it actually dug us, literally did 50, 60 Ks with a massive rip in the side. The fact that you've got something that you can ride out of, including down the road, which was vital as well. So we just kept the speed down, kept the temperature down, despite the fact it being a massive sidewall cut. Moroccans, well, they've obviously seen lots of GSs there, because as we rode in, the bloke had the spanner ready. It was ace. He saw this bike kind of wobbling towards him, clearly with a flat tyre. And he kind of dipped inside, got the torque setting out, and just had the tyre wheel off before we come to a halt.
Morocco's pretty harsh on tyres, isn't it? Because you're on some very, very mixed, rocky terrain out there.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I think of all of the things I now crave more than anything in a bike, it's good suspension, because it takes so much of the effort and the energy and the pain out of riding. I mean, you can't obviously ride like a total moron, but you can ride either quicker with less effort or a bit slower and just watch it all soak it up. And it makes such a difference. I have ridden things like the most beloved of all bikes, which I'm about to stick one into, to be quite honest, the Himalayan, which is great. But how they managed to fit so much mass into such a small amount of volume, I've got no idea. It's just, this is the 411 I'm talking about, not the 450. I haven't ridden one of those. But the 411, oh my God, it's the sweetest bike. But it weighs more than anything. It's the heaviest thing in the world. Probably use it to drive nuclear reactors. Not the engine, obviously, but the mass that's inside it.
Do you know what I'm finding with my bigger bike? In some places, they're actually better and easier to ride because the mass, I think, gives you a better balance than a lighter bike sometimes. It's odd. I can't really work out what it is, but since I've been riding my bigger bike off-road, I'm sort of starting to enjoy it, actually, bizarrely, and I never thought I'd say that.
Good. Okay, so there's stuff going on here, road testy stuff, gyroscopic inertia and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, if you need to suddenly change direction, but on sand, on long straight runs, so if you've got those lovely long chots or chats or whatever they call them down in Morocco, you'd sort of need to be able to see just enough so you can slow down in case something is coming up. The thing that's going to catch you out are the little streams, the little weds that you get going across all of the landscape over there. So you don't want to hit one of those. But, you know, again, I hit a couple of those and was fortunate enough to just sort of soak it up and just ride through it, which, again, that's suspension doing its job for you.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Today's exciting episode is brought to you by Adventure Specs Super Shirt 2.0.
2.0?
Yep, it's a new version. It's got the Flow Armour, which is a lot more breathable, and yet it's still CE AA rated. So it gives you both impact protection and abrasion resistance.
It's an absolute game changer.
It is actually, because you completely forget you've got it on. The armour's really soft. I even find myself checking to see if I've actually remembered to put it on sometimes.
It still feels wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But it's the first thing I put on for all motorcycling activities, basically. I even wore it and you mocked me when we were doing some trials practice.
Thank God you were wearing it that day, because I don't think you'd be with us today if you hadn't been wearing it when you got on the trials bike.
It wasn't that bad. It's even been crash tested on an actual human, which I don't think any other garment has ever been tested that way.
They threw a man down a runway wearing one, didn't they?
It's actually quite scary to watch, but he came away unscathed, which is pretty good news.
What do you wear over the top of yours?
Well, you know I'm a bit of a hipster, so it's usually a check shirt and a very long beard.
Just something to hide the coffee stains?
Yes, the very rare blend espressos that I normally drink.
Nice.
So there are sizes for all from small to, I think, triple XL. It's quite stretchy as well, so it'll fit women and it fits fatties like me too.
To get your super shirt, head to adventurespec.com.
I'm Austin Vince, and in 1995, me and some buddies set out to motorcycle around the world on a trip we called Mondo Enduro. We thought it would be terribly difficult, but it turned out it wasn't. Ultimately, we were the first group to trail ride across Siberia's Zilov Gap, and then also the first crew to ride the Road of Bones to Magadan. And we did it on second-hand 350cc trail bikes without the internet, mobile phones, or GPS. Motorcycling around the world was the defining experience of my life, and I knew I wanted to share that fun. So now I teach the DIY lo-fi Mondo ethos by taking people on miniature expeditions in the Spanish Pyrenees. If you think that sounds like fun, you'd be right. So come on.
You can find lots more information at austinvince.com. I think our friends at Rally Raid have bought out some suspension for the MT450 as well, and that gives you another inch or 2 inches of ground clearance as well. So that, for me, MT450 could be absolutely spot on because it's not crazy heavy. It's a twin-cylinder 450, so you've got plenty of power. Where I ride, I always worry about ground clearance, but that could be a great solution, I think, the MT450. Because again, you can quite happily sit on the motorway at 70 on one of those. You pretty much rode all the way down there after a fashion, didn't you?
The wet bit, we used a ferry. And that's the big bike, small bike argument. It means you can kind of, in a 2-week trip, you can get there and back, although we didn't actually bother getting back. We left the bikes in Morocco and flew home because we were having such a good time. We thought, right, actually, let's stretch this out a bit. And so we just moved the ferry crossing to a few months later and left the bikes down there, which was great. We managed to find a garage, but you can leave it in campsites and things like that. You need to take a little cover if you're going to do that. That's the sort of hot tip, because obviously it's quite dusty. So you would get back to a kind of mud ball were you to leave your bike outside over winter.
So you got the 2-night ferry down to northern Spain, Santander or Bilbao, wherever it was. Apparently, if you go to Plymouth, there is a 1-night ferry as well. If you get in the ferry down there, you're effectively losing 4 nights of your holiday sitting on a stupid boat. That's the downside with that, and the fact it's really blooming expensive now. But if you can get the 1-night ferry, that sounds like a better deal to me for those of us with limited holiday.
Exactly. So that 1-night ferry, which you get sometimes on the way back. So you get in first thing in the morning, the one we did. So we set off on the night, spend the whole day and the night on the ferry, get in first thing on the morning. That night, we were down in Cadiz. And that's a easy day. We weren't hammering it. We were doing 70-ish miles an hour. Just trying to, because the problem is with all these big bikes is the fuel consumption goes rocketing up the moment you go much over 70.
We don't talk about fuel consumption on this podcast. It's irrelevant.
Is it?
Noel used to, but he's been sacked for doing it too often. So,
well, I haven't even made it halfway through the first podcast, and there we go. So that's no good, is it?
I'll let you off. You're again.
But it does mean you could still move along at a reasonable pace. Even as I was going down there, I was thinking, would I do it on my CRF? But one thing I have discovered is the CRF and its tyres and its single-cylinderness, if I ride it about 65 miles an hour, it sets off my own internal organs to the point where after about an hour and a half, if I don't get to a toilet really fast, I'm in terrible trouble. It just sort of creates this bizarre resonance which plays havoc with my guts. And so the idea of riding all the way down through Spain, stopping desperately to evacuate myself. Can you put this sort of stuff in? It just seems really weird. And it's happened every time I've done about 5 long-distance trips on this bike. And I have not made it. I have not made it without kind of having to dash for the crapper. Is that something other people suffer from on singles? I don't know.
So that trip from north to south Spain, what's that, about 600-700 miles or something?
About 700 miles. But there's a fantastic motorway right down the middle. You skirt to the west of Madrid, crack off over the Picos. You're over the Picos in the first hour or so, and that's probably the only moist bit of the trip. If you're going in good Morocco time, which is sort of November through till April, then you might hit a bit of dampness there. But then after that, you're home and dry. Well, not home, but you're heading away from home and dry.
And obviously, if you want to make it a 2-day trip through Spain, Spain's gorgeous, isn't it? No reason why not to stop off and enjoy that part of it too, I guess.
Well, on the way back, we did the Portuguese ACT. So we did less time in Morocco, got up back across the ferry, and then nipped across and picked up the Adventure Country track. You have to pay to get that, but it's about €40 or something, and you get all the tracks for the year, I think. That was fantastic fun. Technically, it takes 5 days, but I sort of did it a bit quicker than that, but I didn't do all of it.
That would be an amazing trip, wouldn't it, if you've got like a month or so to ride ACT, TET, whatever, down to southern Spain, go and do some touring of Morocco, come back a different way through Spain. I mean, that would be a proper adventure, wouldn't it?
It would, and I'm sort of trying to work out how to fit that into sort of 2-week holiday blocks or 2 and a bit, and I'm kind of contemplating setting off on the CRF so I can move in the approved 1.5 hour bouts and then get down to, which also a lighter bike means I can get round some of the TET stuff. I've seen some fantastic videos with Llewellyn Pavey, who uses Desert X to do some TET in Spain, but then I would not necessarily believe that whatever he could do, I could do.
He uses a lot of AI, a lot of his videos are fake.
Ah, yeah, good point, actually.
He's got 6 fingers on one hand. It's bizarre.
Well, I know him well, but I know his dad better because we sponsored Simon for his first Dakar on the magazine, yeah. I'd done some work with him on MCN, and then he was sort of putting together his Dakar thing and came to me and said, look, do you want a story on this? Bear in mind, this was kind of before anybody was really very into all of that stuff in the UK. But we thought on bike, oh, it's really good fun, all of this off-road stuff. I think when I've been on Ride magazine, which was my job before, I'd run a GS 1100 as a test bike, and I was probably one of the earlier people to kind of do that, just because we always wanted to get sports bikes, because we were all young and spunky and wanted like a Fireblade or something, obviously. But anyway, so I got this GS, rode around on that, thought it was brilliant. So I started getting a bit more into the whole, this is a bit more interesting. And then obviously the pinnacle of that is the Dakar, or it certainly was back then. It's more of a race now. It was a bit more of a kind of adventure. I think some of the people who are doing it now, doing that
Malimoto class, whatever it's called now,
staggeringly tricky to achieve. I mean, unbelievable.
Although I did notice this year the standard of riding in that class, it's, what is it, Motul, whatever it's called these days, the standard of riding in there is so good. People were top 10, top 20, I think, in some of those guys on some of the days.
I suspect my days of a casual Dakar entry are possibly behind me. When I was on bike, we suddenly really got into it. And so we approached Honda and got a bike, XR600. And then Simon did all the hard miles, literally. He had to get there, all the sponsorship, do all the rest of the stuff. And then the next year we got him CCM, I think, which I'm not sure how grateful he was about that. But anyway, he finished it. The stories from that were just unbelievable. He rode into a well and knocked himself unconscious and woke up and couldn't find his bike because he hadn't realised it had fallen down the well. So as you can imagine, so we had some fantastic stories in the magazine from that. It's always good to have a tame lunatic to send out to do the dangerous stuff you'd never touch yourself. Simon was absolutely, and he did the Tunisia Rally and a few other, but he did loads of stuff. And then obviously set off and did 10 Dakars in the end.
Hello, this is Future Clive here. Sorry to interrupt. I say future, it's not like I'm coming back to the past to record. It's not like I've got a time machine. It's just a couple of days later. Dickie just asked me to make it very clear that he was in no way and would never like to describe himself on the same level at riding as Simon Pavey. To be honest, I don't think he really needed to make that clear, did he? So that's that. All right, let's go. Let's travel back in time. You did sections T to Z of the Trans-Morocco Trail. Tell us a little bit more about the bits that you rode. Tarmac, gravel tracks, piste, sand. What was it like?
We met Chris in Marrakesh because that was a kind of useful meeting point, and that gets you fairly close to section T. There's some loops that come in round there. And he actually wanted to do these last bits anyway. It tied in very much with him just wanting to sort of check these last bits of the trail. We went from Marrakesh across the Atlas going east. Within an hour and a bit, you are on the most fantastic mountain roads. I mean, unbelievable mountain roads. They really are. If you've ridden around that area, you could do road biking around Morocco and have an amazing time. You've got to be just a tiny bit wary because they are mountain roads. So every now and again, bits of them fall off or bits fall onto them. You're riding round and you see these little pock marks in the road and you think, I wonder what those are. And you realise it's rocks that have fallen from a very great height and landed on the road. And you go, I hope one of those doesn't hit me. Because they've made a big dent in the road, and even if they're not there anymore.
Same with camels and donkeys and things like that.
Absolutely. And that's the whole Morocco experience. But it's much more manageable than I think a lot of people imagine. So I've subsequently been out with some mates who had never ridden anywhere like that before, but were good road riders, and they had a brilliant time. So to get to T, it was about a day, actually, to kind of get us there and on location. But really, really quickly, you're onto piste and you're riding around from town to town and whatever. We didn't need to get any village fuel, which is the little bottles of fuel, normally from an old gas canister or something like that. There are certain bits of the trail where you probably would need to do that, particularly if you're on a certain bike. There you go. Advantage of big bike again, big tank. So that's fine. You're south of the High Atlas. It's kind of quieter territory, which is really nice, I think. I mean, what they've done with the Trans-Moroccan Trail is made something which takes you slightly off the usual track, apart from the dunes bit, which is before the sections we did. Because Chris was also going, I'm no massive fan of riding around in sand these days. You know, you can have trouble. So we did the other bits. And we still had every sorts of terrain. We had kind of rocky river crossings. A couple of those were quite interesting. You need to sort of paddle across on those and be a bit thoughtful. Or, if you've got magnificent Ducati suspension, you can ride it like an utter moron and skip across, feeling lucky. But there's not that much to catch you out. There's stuff that will slow you down, but not really stuff that will kind of go, oh, I don't think I can get across that. Because you definitely can. Even if it's been washed out. I mean, that's one of the things I think about riding in the spring down there. You can come across, there'll have been the rains come down, as Toto says, the rains come down in Africa. And they do. And they come washing down the Wed and they wash away the little bridges and they put all these baby heads into the river. So you've just got to be a bit thoughtful about there. But nearly always in Morocco, there'll be some massive grading machine lurking around a corner which will just kind of clear a path. It won't be a road, but it'll be something that's very doable. All of these roads are being used for people to get around from village to village. It doesn't matter where you are as well. There'll be the bloke on a Yamaha Townmate, with a family on the back and a goat. He'll kind of chug past you and it'll be tortoise and the hare to the next town.
And that's not even an exaggeration, is it? I've seen that so often out there with like a goat hanging off the back of the rack and his wife and his kid sitting in front of the goat. It's amazing.
Absolutely. That's one of the kind of joys. You also think, I feel a bit overloaded, a bit over-equipped here, given that he's quite clearly doing 30 or 40 miles across what we'd consider to be really inhospitable terrain. That's his daily commute.
In his safety flip-flops. How did you find Morocco? Obviously, it sounds like you've been a few times now. Things like the hotels, the restaurants, all that kind of stuff. Were you booking as you travelled or just rocking up? How did that work?
We used booking.com, which is incredibly easy to use, and they're all on it. Slightly fight against doing things like that, but when you are in a country where perhaps you're not necessarily speaking the language and whatever, so some of the places you can book, which is presumably got to give 20% of its fee to booking.com. I mean, this one place we found was at €3 a night. I would say, having had a look at the pictures, it was slightly overpriced at that. But nevertheless, we decided not to go there. We thought we'd stretch to 12 and get our own rooms. Because that's the other thing. You're paying for a bed. So €3 a night is one bed, but there were about another 30 in that room. So if you wanted to spend it with a whole gang of people who've trucked their way up from South Africa, presumably, and are getting excited about the idea of finally getting to their destination.
My experience of Morocco is just that, really. You can find yourself in some amazing kind of oasis Bedouin-style hotel with reds and golds and cushions, and it's absolutely amazing. The food's great, and you can usually get beer. Down to, I think there was one night we stayed in Fumzagid, we stayed in this basically one room, and we were handed a blanket as we went into the room, and that was it. There was no mattresses. You had to sleep on the floor under a blanket. But that was one of the most memorable nights of the trip.
Yeah. There were a couple of nice-ish nights, but they were never more than 50, 60 euros, I think, and that would be with food. The food is the food. Because normally, particularly if you book it in advance, they'll have just made it all, and you'll get there, you'll have your tagine or your Moroccan salad or whatever it is, and that'll be that. Eat what you're given, which is invariably delicious.
I've never been ill out there.
It's great food. It's incredibly reasonable. I think at some of the little hotels, you'll be pushed to get a beer because that's just not in the culture.
On my first trip out there, I'd heard this. We were only allowed to take one bag to go on the support truck, so we didn't have to carry bags on the bikes. First night in Marrakesh, and there's just happened to be this big supermarket where we were. So I went and bought a crate of beer and stayed it in my bag. And we got to this, I think it was when we got to Fumzagid, we'd had a very long, it was like a 12-hour day, and we'd run out of water and all this kind of palaver. And we were going, mate, have you got some beers? And he went, yeah, we'll give you some beers with your dinner. And we were like, no, we want beer now. Kind of didn't get it really. And it's like, oh, hang on a minute. I've got 48 cans of beer here, lads. Here we go.
Yeah, it is weird actually, because you think, the one thing you really, really, really fancy after a dusty day is a beer. It is a thing. It's quite odd, actually. I mean, mint tea goes some way to curing it all.
Obviously, you had Chris. You probably could have just followed Chris Scott through Morocco, but how were you navigating out there when you did your trip? Did you stick slavishly to the route?
What I actually did was I slavishly followed Chris when we were with him because he, it turns out, trying to kind of preempt where might be a good idea is kind of pointless when you're with the person who knows more about the country than probably anybody else. So it seemed a bit pointless, really. So we absolutely could sort of go, right, I'm not sure about this. I think this might be a bit like that. In 832 yards, I sensed that something's going to be happening. And you go, Chris, this is terrible. You're like a yard out, mate. I mean, what's going on? There were certainly about 3 occasions where myself and Henry, the guy I was riding with, just looked at each other and thought, that was slightly uncanny. Bear in mind, he said, well, I think I need to re-ride this area because I haven't been here for 7 or 8 years or something. His knowledge is ridiculous. Occasionally, I would sort of whiz off and have a bit of a rag around and follow a track on the GPS. And also getting down there, we used a mixture of GPS, used tracks and routes. We both got Garmin's, actually, and which meant that we were able to flick the information between the two, Bluetooth. Because I know navigation is one of those ghastly subjects. It's like tyres, isn't it, really, where you just kind of go, right, what's the best way of doing it and how's the best way of doing it? When we were down there, I had a phone running, so I could, just in case I could see what, if anything wasn't showing up on the Garmin. I managed to ride us into a selection of mystery objects like massive reservoirs because I'd set the thing up to use tracks rather than routes, so it just connected points and rather than following any kind of road. Because everyone goes, yeah, well, you want to use tracks off road, and which is fine. I do normally use tracks off road. If you're being a little bit casual and not perhaps zooming in on the thing, just trying to get somewhere, it's a good idea to then run the track round the edge of the reservoir rather than just going, oh, I'll go from here to here, because the nav will just take you across that. We bought mapping for Morocco for Garmin. I think you could buy the whole of Africa map, or the whole of North Africa map for about 120 quid. I think I bought like the Northwest Africa for about 50 quid or something. And that actually includes quite a lot of the dirt trails, because obviously that's how people get around. So it's got a lot of stuff on there. So you can use routes to quite a high degree. You know what the big saving grace is, and this is, again, another Chris tip, is you just get hold of Google Earth and you zoom in and you look at exactly what's going on. And he, I know, uses Google Earth, makes KML files, which can then be exported to GPX. When I was sort of planning stuff, I tend to look at Google Earth and then actually have my Garmin open at the same time and try and map onto the Garmin. So I'm using Google Earth to check what the state of the route is, to see if you can see you can see if there's tyre tracks and stuff on it, which is fantastic.
And the coverage for your mobile phone in Morocco is insanely good as well, because once you kind of over the Atlas, it's relatively flat, isn't it? So you get coverage everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of times I'd sort of set off and then I get a phone call going, I'd be sitting there thinking, this is the most remote place on earth. I've found the only tree. I'm sitting under some shade and patting a goat who is my friend, and I shall wait for the others to turn up. You get a phone call or a text message going, I think you've taken the wrong route there, actually. You want to just sort of, if you just nip back here, sort of like drop a pin, and you go, oh, okay, all right, fine. And so you think, well, I wasn't quite as remote as I thought, which is actually incredibly reassuring. There were certainly a couple of spots where I was 20, 30 miles away from the other guys, not deliberately, just kind of setting off on a little exciting mission. I found a couple of old Dakar pistes and thought I'm going to try and ride them like a Dakar rider, and then very quickly realising that's a massively bad idea and slowing down, because they've got all of those mounds, which are the guiding points. And so you just follow, you sort of go from one little mound to another across these clay beds. That is very sort of heritage exciting.
That's what we're going to be doing in March, hopefully, as well. Wilderness Wheels is based in Ouarzazate. Usually flying to Marrakesh, they'll organise transport over the Atlas Mountains down to Ouarzazate and then kind of ride the following day, have a night in Ouarzazate and ride the following day. Just amazing. So once you get to Ouarzazate, you're not too far then from the desert proper, are you?
You're straight into it there. Ouarzazate is ace because it's got the massive Eye of Sauron in the middle of it. It's got this huge solar generator. It's made up of salt, and it's got this big tower that you can see from hundreds of miles away. It is the weirdest thing. And it's great. You just head towards it and you know you're going to get to a city.
obviously you did take your own ridiculously big bike to Morocco. What paperwork do you have to do to get into the country with your own bike?
Because it's enormous, I could carry a filing cabinet with me, which is what is required, obviously. No, it's not. All you need is your V5, but it has to be in your name. The exciting thing is, obviously, because it's a company bike, you will probably need a letter from someone in the company. My bike is owned by the company, so you just got to have a letter from someone in the company. I then had to go onto company's house, actually, in front of the bloke, and said, look, that's me. You know, the person who wrote the letter, which is me, about my company owning my bike, and I'm allowed to take my bike into it because it's my company, etc., etc. And the guy was going, hang on a second, this all sounds a bit dodgy. I said, so we went onto company's house, which he recognised, and there it was, the company, me as a director, the bit of paper, and it all kind of tied up. That was the only micro complication which we kind of ran into. They don't even ask you for proof of your own insurance. Since Brexit, your insurance doesn't carry over to Morocco. It used to. You used to be able to ride on a British or any European insurance policy. All the Dutch and French and German guys we bumped into don't need to do anything. They don't need to get any extra insurance. We do. You buy it at the port. So we went into Tangier Med, it's called, which is the sort of easy one to get out of. Nador is where the TMT proper starts. That's over a bit further to the east. It has got a little row of huts, and you buy your insurance. We bought 10 days insurance. We've got a SIM at the same place, and they throw it in for you. That was us set up, and it was fine. The insurance is actually a little bit expensive, I think. It's a good idea. It'll kind of make sure you're covered. The first time I went to Morocco, kit-wise, I thought, right, I'm going to take some light-coloured stuff. I've got my Gaillon Trials boots, which are brilliant. They are comfy. You can walk around in them. These are the waterproof ones. They are so comfortable. Not got a brilliant shank in them, unfortunately, which means if you're standing on the pegs for a very long time, you can be a bit, you get a little bit sore. But otherwise, they're ace. That was the winning thing. And then some dirt track gloves, which were absolutely ace, again, because they've got air going through them. But then I took an air-stitched pair of trousers, which I've had for decades. They don't have a lot of vents in them, but they're a light colour, so that was great. But I took a wax cotton jacket. So all my mates, right, thought that I looked like some massive desert fox wannabe twat. I had a piss pot helmet and a shimach and whatever, and they just go, look, this is cosplay riding. It is nonsensical outfit. I said, look, it's great stuff. Exactly the right weight. It'll be just fine. Wax cotton, even in November, was the worst material in the world. All it does is it lets all the heat in, none of the moisture out. It was the hottest. I pretty well was riding just in a T-shirt most of the time. It was so unbearably hot. There were only a few times when I actually wore the thing.
We're in deep midwinter now, and it's kind of mad flying out there in January, February, March, and it's absolutely roasting, especially when you've been out riding it. You do look for shade just to go and sit in, try and cool down a bit. Inevitably, you end up riding in just like your body armour, and that's it, really. Maybe a jersey over the top, but it is massively warm. But then freezing cold at night.
It's a cold country with a hot sun, is the phrase.
What is the appeal of Morocco? Why did you go to Morocco, and why would you recommend anybody else should give it a try?
Well, I went there to kind of slightly reconnect with my very first riding kick, which was obviously around Egypt. It's by far the most exhilarating place you can get to quickly. It's closer than Greece, for example, which is fantastic for riding. I think Turkey's supposed to be amazing for riding. Those are both a long way away. And so even Spain and Portugal have got fantastic riding, absolutely world-class up in the Pyrenees and Picos and wherever. But Morocco is that next level of both madness in terms of it's so exotic and fantastic fun. And then also all of the kind of adventurous side of being able to ride for miles, hundreds of miles off-road, which is a total joy. It is so refreshing and exhilarating. It's an incredibly exhilarating place to ride. It really is.
Well, he's not wrong. It is utterly brilliant. Get yourself out there as soon as you can. You really will enjoy it. Massive thanks to Dickie for doing that. That was a very, very enjoyable conversation, and we've spoken afterwards, and we hope to do some more stuff together as well, so that could be fun too. One more thing, the Adventure Motorcycle Film Festival for 2027 is now accepting entries. So if you've made a film in the last 2 years or you plan to make a film soon, then make sure you get it entered into the competition. Just check out our website or go to Film Freeway to get it entered. And maybe you get to see it on the big screen in Kendal next February. Right, catch you later. Just a final word from one of our newest and dearest sponsors. If you've ever dreamt of riding across the vast desert plains, carving through remote mountain passes, or cresting cathedral dunes, Wilderness Wheels in Morocco makes it real. Based in Ouarzazate, they run fully guided off-road motorcycle adventures across the Sahara and Atlas Mountains. Complete with incredible food, welcoming accommodation and decades of regional knowledge that make every day feel an unforgettable joy. And here's the big one. In March 2027, you can come ride Morocco with Clive, Noel, and possibly the new TAMP podcast co-host. A proper week of sand, stories, and spectacular riding with the TAMP podcast crew. Book your spot at wildernesswheels.com and come find the Morocco you've always been dreaming about. Thanks for listening. We really do appreciate it. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and if you really appreciate what we do, please consider supporting us on either Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Links are available on our website, tampodcast.com, where you can also go to our store, that's a shop in English, and buy some branded stuff. Please keep listening and, more importantly, spreading the word.